Can I just talk conspiracy for a moment?
Yeah, let's do it.
I don't know if this is part of the show. I'm just telling you. So, we've been playing with these rain cloud makers and stuff, right?
Right.
Nobody gonna
And
talk about
then
it.
and
Nobody
then
gonna. We
and
not gonna talk
then
about it.
you have some flooding.
Massive flooding. Massive flooding in some weird places. I mean, nobody's gonna talk about that.
Which which places I know like the Asheville area has flooded before.
Not
Are there
like
other
this.
places that it's
This
been
is
like 100 years since they've had a flood like this, right?
yeah. And then, have you seen some of the floodwaters that are coming in? How they're jumping like that? Some
Yeah.
weird.
I have seen some of that weird footage, but I don't know
I can't
like
validate it, so I
one
better
way
be
or the
careful.
other. I don't know.
Exactly. It's just weird to me. Oh wow, look at you. You got brighter.
Yeah.
Oh.
I just pushed my
Uh
button. I realized with this camera, I got to adjust the lights a little bit.
it's just a little weird to me that so yeah, it's just weird. I don't know. I'm kind of waiting, but I know there's a lot of people that need some help right now. And hey, do you remember? I don't remember everything about Katrina perfectly. I'd have to go back and study. But do you remember, like, did it take the government a long time to get down there to help them out and do some things, or was it fairly quickly?
Well, I remember there being a lot of complaints that it was taking so long.
Yeah.
Um, but that was the first real um, natural disaster on my radar. I mean, there had been other ones, but I was too young. Um, and so I don't know how long it does normally take, but
For them to get organized and it.
yeah,
So, do you think? I remember though there was a huge push from a lot of stars, a lot of people. Churches were down there way before everybody else was. You had um, what's his name? The minister. Everybody, no, I can't. Wow, that's horrible. Can't remember his name right now. Um, Billy Graham's son, Franklin Graham, was down there. Everybody was down
yeah,
there, really like helping out, and churches were getting jets down there. I remember there was a lot of, and then the government came later, but
right.
like Katrina just the levee blew and everything was like crazy. So I don't remember, and I,
Yeah.
I just remember that piece where you had um, Kanye West just went off and was like, George Bush doesn't care about black people,
Right. Yeah.
and
Th- that was the narrative at the time.
yep, and that's
Um,
why they were slow to help, and it wasn't around. I don't think it was around election year at all, but I don't know. I'm seeing a lot of people saying, "Oh, this is racial. That's happening right now. That the government isn't there, the government isn't helping, and people are hurting, and they don't care about these people because they're white, they're poor, and they're Trump voters." And so you're seeing a lot of people kind of saying, "Where is the government at to take care of their own people right now? They're sending all this money over to Ukraine. They're sending money over to Israel, and people are like, "Yo, can we get some of that assistance? Because it doesn't seem like our government cares anything about us right now."
yeah.
And
Well, and a lot of people saying where was the where where was the infrastructure money that was passed? Where did that go? Because there's a bunch of failed infrastructure that hasn't been updated in 50, 70 years. Um, that had it, if the dam had been updated, it probably wouldn't have gone. Things like that too. So
come on,
there's
Katrina.
definite.
You're talking about
Well,
in
no, in the present one, yeah. So in Katrina, and this is where I can't remember was if there was if they had just not updated the infrastructure, and that's why it went, or if it was just one of those things that happens. Um, but I know that there's a lot of conversation now about the infrastructure that had not been updated, and the infrastructure money that was dedicated to it. Now everybody's saying, where did it go? Because it didn't ever get spent on infrastructure. So where'd the infrastructure money go that was supposed to update this dam, that sort of thing.
I When Kanye West said George Bush doesn't care about black people, my first reaction was like, "Really, bro? Like, come on." Um, I didn't buy his argument at all. That he didn't make an argument; he just made a statement, and I didn't find that convincing at all. And I thought it was a horrible thing to say in the middle of something that was a tragedy. And I think, when was Katrina? What year was that? 2006.
Mm.
Man,
I think what's really interesting, or I don't know if it's what's been strange to watch is it's
2005. It was 2005.
2005
Yeah, yeah.
is
August 2005.
the divisions. There isn't a there isn't a unified society. Like 9/11, everybody came around and said, um, whatever whatever we need to do. These are fellow Americans.
Yep.
And
I
now,
remember that. I
um,
was going to St.
yeah,
Louis right after 9/11 to go see my brothers and sisters, and I was on a bus, and the bus was fully loaded of Americans headed to New York. I mean, I was probably the only person who was getting dropped off I think I was going to Detroit or St. Louis, one of the 2, and probably Detroit. And I remember, because I couldn't fly. You couldn't fly. Nobody wanted to fly at that time, and I don't think they were allowing people to fly, but everybody was headed to New York. You had the bus was, and everybody was talking to everybody else. It was like, "Yo, did you got friends out there? Who are you trying to help? Like, we're just going there." You had photographers that were headed that way. You just had people who had taken time off of their work, just common folks. Nobody's, it wasn't like the high class, just the average American. And it was all the races were there. It didn't matter. His bus was multicultural in that sense, and they were all going to New York to go help. And anyway, I was just interrupting you to say, like, that was a different moment. At Katrina, I kind of remember the same thing too. I remember a lot of people were headed to Katrina. I wasn't on the bus at that time, but I do remember a lot of people, a lot of churches from Minneapolis were headed down to Katrina to come help out and to see what they could do to help folks. Um, but
yeah.
everything now seems to be happening so fast. I don't
Well,
remember the time frame in which everything took place.
some of it is now. There was a lot of you could watch a lot of it live as it happened because of social media. I think some of it
Right.
too, is now we're so connected to people. Like, I texted my friends that live out there and didn't get a response for over 24 hours, and I was like, "Are they dead? What is
Right.
going on?" Like, you don't have that kind of um, delay anymore. But also, like, you had so many people on Twitter and Facebook saying, "Well, this is what they get for denying climate change."
I saw that. Or where all these conservatives now want the government to come in and help them. This is what they get for, you know, we shouldn't help them because they've been against big government, right? And
Right, right, yeah.
they wanted.
So that kind of, um, and that's kind of that's sort of religious language more than civic language at that point too, which I remember.
It's pure inhumane, though. I don't
It
even.
is. But it's inhumane. But you can be inhumane if you insulted the gods, right? Then somebody you and in it's not inhumane if they've insulted. So I remember, talking with the when I was living in California, um, talking with a neighbor who was a nature worshiper, and when somebody died surfing, and they said, well, he had gone out into a wave that he wasn't ready for, which is disrespectful of the ocean, and so the ocean killed him. That's what you get. So it was unfeeling, but it was, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. That it because if you insult the goddess, the ocean, then it's just that she kills you, and you don't have to be humane towards them anymore because they got what they deserved. I think that you're seeing that kind of religious reaction to people that oppose big government. You're like, no, but big government is that
I
it's a
see.
God response. You don't, you didn't make your sacrifices to me, and so you're getting what you deserve. Or you didn't make your, you didn't make your climate change sacrifices, so it's your,
Your
you're just
judgment.
getting what you deserve. This is just judgment. And that, it doesn't surprise me anymore because you see it all the time, but it is, I think it's something that as Christians we need to stop and say, we got to make sure that we don't fall into that trap of turning the civic sphere into a religious, um, into a religious jurisdiction. You know,
There is.
whether it's,
I'm listening. Go ahead.
yeah, whether it's, when a shooting happens, um, I think we do that sometimes rather than thinking about the human toll in those situations. Um, and that sometimes it's just in response, but responding in kind to evil uh is not acceptable, I guess, for Christians, right? We don't return evil for evil. And so there's a lot of those situations where we we have to make sure that we don't accept the terms of the rivalry, um the religious rivalry that is being set up.
You stop right as I plug back in. But do you think it's do you so when man, there's so much I want to ask you about this. When Kanye said Donald or not Donald Trump, I'm sorry, George W. Bush doesn't care about black people. Um, that didn't ring with me at all. Uh, I felt like it's crazy. Now, Bush wasn't completely as pro-life as I wanted him to be, but I felt like someone who cares about the abortion issue, primarily when you have a lot of black people who are doing abortions, it's hard for me to levy that charge at them. Um, and watching the government and how they act now, I don't think they care about hardly anybody. And I don't think the line
Yeah.
is designed to uh, be around racial lines. I don't think that's the case. I think it's bigger than that, but I don't think it's less than that either. So I could be swayed that, oh, these guys are primarily. I mean, look, watching how they have not protected Trump the way that they should have, that he's had 2 assassination attempts on his life, and watching them play lawfare against Trump, and then for them to look at areas that are heavily Trump areas around a month before election and making sure that their infrastructure is out of place when they could look at this as a blessing in one sense or another. And I wouldn't
Right.
be surprised by that. Like that doesn't surprise me at all. So I don't think it's like, oh, these white people necessarily. I think but I don't think it could be less than that. I don't think these guys, if they're willing to kill babies and they're willing to inject people with certain shots and force them on people to control them, I'm not surprised that they wouldn't calculate all of those things to say,
Right.
hey, these are these people. Um, People like this. I've more and more I'm doing marketing. People like this are not like us, right? People who do that, and so they make a separation from them and us. And I don't think it's less than that, but I don't think it's the majority of that. So I wouldn't have put white as the main thing. I think if it was a large community of black people that supported and endorsed Trump and got behind him and who were conservatives and who were lower class, I don't think they would be coming for them anytime soon either. So I don't think that it matters. So I don't think that that's the only defining factor, but I think it could be one of them because I don't trust these guys anymore. But
Yeah.
so I could say like these guys, I don't know. I mean, they're poor, so they don't really line up to these people's qualifications of folks who they think matter for them. I think that they could, I think if they're a large majority of supporters of Trump, then they would be like, oh, let them take their time getting there. Let's just slow this down. But I just feel like I have to think so nefarious of the people in charge in order to make these decisions. And then when I start thinking about it, I can qualify almost everything that I'm saying. I could just be like, well, they don't like Trump. They've been going after him. And if this is Trump's people, I mean, look what they did to the protesters in January 6th. Like, these guys are still being held without any of the legal system applying to them in any real way. So I don't feel like I
Right.
can make an argument against that it's not racial in a real way. I think it really could be, but it's not all that it is. And I'm really torn about it. And then I hate the fact that I'm thinking so much about that instead of the people that are there and how can we help? How can we be helping them? And so this is just, I'm so angry at the current state of things. I don't like it because I don't think it's helping anybody that we can't think of anybody who doesn't line up with us not being us, right? So
Right.
I would hope and I would like to believe that Christians, and I do believe this, if they were in charge and this happened to an area that happened to be really gay, San Francisco, let's just say that this tragedy happened to San Francisco and it just started washing away, that we would be there to try and help. That if we were in
Right.
charge and it was our government, that we'd be like, look, those are Americans, those are our people, and we need to get there and we need to help them. But I feel like that the way this is going, I wonder if we would still have that same attitude. I think we would. I think most Christians, those in political power, say, wait, this is our responsibility, this is our duty as Americans to help out each other.
Yeah. I think the I do think that citizenship, being a good citizen is a Christian virtue that you still are going to find. Um,
Right. That's
you
no
know, I
partiality, right? Like, that's inside of our.
right. I mean, I think you would have people that obviously fail at it, but they would fail at a standard they probably hold to. Um, what I what I'm what I don't think we're taking into account is just the populist uprising that's going on. Um, is really, really, I think, changing and affecting things really at a really deeply significant level. And I don't think, and that's where there's a lot of, I think a lot of Christians. I mean, I've been thinking through this a lot because because populism is a difficult moment to live
Mm.
through
What do you mean by
because
populism?
populism is when uh, a significant portion or a majority of the population stops believing that the the people in charge, the institutions have their best interest in mind and have some other and have a basically have a reason to serve someone other than the populace. So you've got, so right now it's internet, you've got either international globalists or um you know they, you might not, so what ends up happening is not everybody ends up agreeing on who the institutions are serving,
Right,
but
right, right.
everybody, what holds them together is that they believe they're not serving the population, and so you have a populist uprising. And
So am
this
I in that
happened.
category? Because I
Oh,
don't think that they're serving us.
right, yeah, I'm in that category too, but I think what's hard is a populist coalition is not a pure thing, right? A populist
Mm.
coalition is going to end up being, like, you end up having people on your side that you go, how are we on the same side? We don't agree on
RFK.
anything. Right. Yeah. So RFK and Trump, that's a really good, this is what happens in a populist uprising. And I think a lot of Christians have been in a purity movement type of way of thinking because we want to be holy. So
Mm.
what do you do when what does a Christian do during a populist uprising? Well, the options are retreat from the whole system, um, or oppose the populist uh, uh, situation, because you look at it and you say, well, some of the people in on that side are not good Christians, which is very true. So you've got, uh, when I don't know if you just saw that are a number of Muslim groups that are now throwing their support behind Donald Trump, right? Historically, Christians and Muslims have not been on the same side on very, I mean, it's on very little.
Yeah.
A 1,200-year war to the death type of situation that we've been in, really until, I mean, World War One kind of ended the fight between Christendom and the Ottoman Empire, and that's just because both of them crumbled under the weight of mercantilism. So you have that, but you've had this, from the year 600 to the early 1900s, you have this war going on, and so you ended up with kind of Muslims on the other side of America from in World War One, but they weren't on the other side of all the Europeans, right? So you
Mm.
had European Muslims starting to, well, that's because there was a big, there were populist movements, that happened, in many ways the Civil War was a populist movement, and that's why the Civil War was a populist moment. And that's why when people say, well, what was the Civil War about? You say, well, this is, and somebody says, well, this is what the Civil War is about. You say, yeah, but I can find people over here saying that the Civil War was about this for them, and that these people saying it was about this for them. It was a populist moment. And so the coalitions that come together in a populist moment are not pure at all. I think we're in one of those. So what does a Christian do when you say, well, hey, I'm on the I'm think I'm for this populist side, and then the log cabin Republicans show up, and you go, oh, but I'm not with them. Like, I'm not with that group over there. I'm not with that group. But here we are having to form a coalition because the people that control the institutions oppose the people, and so are the it I think Christians we're unprepared for this moment theologically, um, and so you've got some people that say whatever you have to do to end globalism is worth it.
Just yeah, right.
um,
Just end it because it's going to kill us all. Right.
right, it's going to kill us all, it's going to destroy civilization, and I think globalism is trying to destroy civilization and kill us all, um, and but then saying, okay, well, it's a little bit like saying, well, if can you vote in gay marriage to end transing the kids, right? Like, can you, and you say, well, I don't want to have to actually I don't want to choose between those two things. But you've got all of you've got this weird group of people that argued for gay marriage that are now opposing the transing of the kids. So what do you do?
Right.
Right. I
Right.
mean, so
Yeah, I mean, you have
you
Trump at Mar-a-Lago inviting a large homosexual group, and you have what's her name, Carrie Lake, sitting up there saying, you homosexuals are the tip of the spear, right? And that's in our side. It's like,
right, yeah.
when did we
So
let the gays in?
well, and those sorts of questions, that's what makes people say, oh, well, if you're going to compromise there, then I feel completely fine siding with the globalists, right? Because you're compromising over there, and so now compromise is fine. Okay, I get more. If I side with the globalists, they've
Right.
got the money, and so and you see that happening in the church, and then those two groups attacking one another, um, saying you're not really Christian because
because
of
yeah,
this or because of that,
your
right?
group's not
Because
pure.
your group's not pure. And but I think the what we've fallen into is the we have allowed the moment to redefine our political philosophy, um and our civic philosophy, our civic theology of citizen being a citizen, or a philosophy of citizenry, is being redefined by the moment, because it wasn't sturdy, right? It wasn't ready for this situation. It wasn't ready for this moment. And I mean, I think that's a deep education issue, right? A deep.
Oh man,
So
we're in
um,
trouble. So,
we are in trouble, but populist uprisings never move to. They're never 2 generations long, so that's should be encouraging, right? That you've never had a multi-generational populist uprising, because it doesn't. There actually isn't a positive vision that a populist group can put together, because a populist group is a coalition based on stopping an enemy. It's not a building coalition. So that gives a huge opportunity for Christians that have been preparing to build, that are ready to build. I think I think of the book of Ezra, when the populist uprising works and they get to go back, and then and it's a blessing from God. And then they say, wait, does anybody know how to do this? And they go, well, Ezra's been in the library a long time. Maybe we should go get Ezra. He'll tell us what to do, because they didn't actually have a populist. They didn't have a positive vision about what to do once they got there. Their vision was get out of exile, not let's get to the land and build something. So Ezra was prepared, and often the person with the vision comes out of the other side of the populist vision and gets to build. I think this was the bad part of Nazi Germany, because you have a populist uprising, and Hitler was the one with the vision, and his positive vision was not a Christian informed vision. It was a Nietzschean informed vision. He was a Machiavellian, philosophically Machiavellian informed vision, in which race was and culture were kind of the culture in abstraction. A romantic vision of culture were um, the defining features, right? So you have Mein Kampf means my struggle, and it's a reference to the evolution of the psyche of a hero that Nietzsche talks about, right? So that the hero is born out of struggle, and Führer is German for hero. It's what Nietzsche says. The great man, the heroic man, the new hero, the Ubermensch, is going to come out of the struggle in these moments of societal collapse or of social disorder, and lead them into a new golden age through the creation of a new morality, right? That is centered around his mythology. And Hitler believed that about himself, right? So Mein Kampf is all about how he is being built into this hero, and that's why there wasn't a place in his restored Germany for churches, that sort of thing. But it was the populist uprising that made it possible, right? So it was the populist uprising that left a gap for a positive vision. The church had gone modernist. The church was a part of was one of the institutions that had stopped serving the people. The church was one of the institutions that the populists believed they needed to overthrow. Um,
can I pause you there?
yeah,
Because you're not making a case for me that this is bad in one sense.
I don't think I think that populist.
You
This
know what I
is
mean?
populism in and of itself is not, I don't think, is good or bad.
It's what happens
Um,
afterwards that starts to
it's what, yeah,
determine.
it's what happens. It's what happens afterwards, and whether or not the church is prepared as an institution to uh, provide, because populism is anti-institutional.
Yeah.
It's anti-institutional because of the belief that the institutions have stopped serving the population and have some other master, some other thing that they're serving. That
So
there's
does populism seek to restore institutions?
populism seeks to dethrone institutions,
Okay.
and
So
that's where there isn't a vision for more than that, because you can't have a vision, because the coalition can't hold around a positive vision in a populist moment.
right, because they can only be united around what they're against. Because if they start thinking about what they're for, now you have the Muslims, the atheists, the gays, and the Christians, and everybody else start fighting about what the positive. So we're going to get there. Ultimately, we're about to get there in one sense, because the populist vision is doing a good job of making, well, and I think the institutions have done a good job of rising up a populace that don't trust it. Right.
Right.
Nobody
Yeah.
trusts it. So then,
Nobody trusts it. Yeah.
and the
I mean,
church,
it's wild hearing leftists say the media is not telling the truth. Look at the media. And people on the right saying the media is not telling the truth. Look at the media. And nobody believes the media is serving
the
the
people,
population,
yeah.
the people.
So when you talk about the church being capable of steering what comes next, they weren't ready to serve either. The institution has failed us. I just think about what happened over this weekend. I think it was this weekend. You familiar with Ray Ortlund at all?
I I
Okay.
learned who he was this weekend.
Okay. So I'm gonna just go back a little bit. So you have Megan Basham. Well, let's go back a little even before that. Ooh, the Christian church got upended by social justice movement because they didn't know what to do with their guilt. I forgot. I was talking to you this weekend, and I forgot in the culture that I was in, the Baptist culture that I was in, Reformed Baptist culture. I forgot how much guilt was still used to try and push me into a righteous living, as if that's a fair way
Right.
to say it, right? It was, and I didn't notice that was happening until I continued to reform until I became Presbyterian, and then there was still some of it there, but the more and more I matured, and less I realized that I needed guilt to drive my motivations to be righteous, just resting and trusting in Christ and believing in Christ, and um, and bringing my sin to Christ. But it was guilt was really used as a motivator to do almost
Yeah.
anything, whether it was to give, whether it's to help, it was just always used. So then the church gets into this position where, because they're so guilty, the social justice movement comes in and was able to manipulate us on, since you're so guilty, let me point out this area and let me show you how to get out of your guilt.
Right.
Social justice movement just ransacked us. I mean, they just came in and steered the whole ship to the point now that the church, the ineptness of the church, because it has so much guilt, was proven in the last, I can remember this movement starting really hitting the churches 2005, 2006. It really started hitting the churches. It didn't come to full bloom in probably 2011, 2012. And then it just took over. And so now you have this past weekend, you have Ray Ortlund coming out saying, his tweet was, never Trump, this time Harris, always Jesus. And now he deleted this tweet because it said it got misunderstood, which was kind of interesting because I thought it was really simple. Never
Yeah.
Trump means that he never wants to see Trump in presidency ever.
Right.
This time Harris, which means he's doing everything he can to get rid of Trump, and he's willing to vote in Harris because he thinks that's a better way to get rid of whatever Trump's bringing with him.
Yeah.
And he thinks that doing that is always Jesus. Right.
Well, or he probably, the always Jesus is, he's probably trying to say, all, since a leadership issue, I always trust in Jesus. I never think Trump should be elected. This time I think Harris should be elected. I always think Jesus is in charge, is probably the most gracious way to interpret it.
Whatever his always Jesus is, it includes Harris.
Yes.
which is I don't understand that, right? Whatever that is, I don't understand. I
Here's
would love
but
go ahead.
populism what makes it is the only thing that makes that statement make sense. Because Trump is a populist candidate, right? And populism overthrows the position and the power of institutions. What I don't know who what Ortland does, but is he an institutional guy? Is he in
Yes,
charge
yes,
of
yes.
what is he? What
I have to
institution?
go. I think he was on the Gospel Coalition. Um, I have to go find out where all he works
They've
at.
been anti-populist all along, the Gospel Coalition.
I forget. I know he was really popular back in the day.
And so if somebody says if somebody comes along and they say I am not willing to join in a populist movement, I think as a Christian I could totally actually understand that. Populism makes me super nervous, um and because it's a wrecking ball. It isn't a positive force in the world, right? It is a wrecking ball.
But do you need a
And
wrecking ball right now, though?
well, but that's actually the debate, right? Is can can these institutions be won back to their original purpose? Populism shows up when people stop believing that these so the first great awakening, the second great awakening were both populist movements.
So I'm gonna give you his rundown real quick before you move there.
Okay.
So current position, he's president of the Renewal Ministries, canon theologian and priest in the diocese of the Western Gulf Coast of the Anglican Church in North America, pastor to pastors at Emmanuel Church in Nashville, Tennessee. Past positions, founder, pastor of Emmanuel Church in Nashville, Tennessee from 2008 2019, associate professor of Old Testament and Semitic languages in the Trinity Evangelical Divinity Church in 89 to 98. Uh, other affiliations, council member of the Gospel Coalition, contributor to the ESV Study Bible. He was educated with a bachelor's at Wheaton College. Um, I mean, ordained
So
at Church Lake Avenue Congregational Church in Pasadena, California. As an author, I mean,
so think of it this way. When does a PhD stop meaning something? During a when people stop believing in the institutions that give PhDs.
right, right.
Right. When does the um you when does uh let's say you're a New York Times writer, right? And you have worked your whole life. New York Times used to be considered the top of the heap. That's where the best writers are, the best journalists. You finally make it, and a populist uprising shows up.
Nobody
The New
cares.
York Times stops meaning what it used to meant, what it used to mean, and so you oppose it because it it is this institution has a long honored history, and it does. Like the New York Times has been the place where the best journalistic writing happened. It was that for a long time. When everybody says, well, but now it doesn't serve its readers anymore, it has an agenda, and the agenda is not serve my readers. The agenda is serve this power or that power,
Right, right.
whatever. So when um, populists come in and say, I don't care anymore, right? And they're gonna destroy that multi-generational institution of the New York Times through not caring about it anymore. The New York Times has doubled down in its opposition to populism. It's doubled down in its opposition to allowing any of these people
Because it's an
uh,
institution that's under threat.
because it's the institution that's under threat.
So then you got go ahead. There's
So
so much I want to ask you. I don't want to
you're
forget.
really starting to see that kind of thing happen where people they go they when their identity is wrapped up in the institution, you um the threat to the institution needs to be opposed, even if that means taking sides with it. You're taking sides with the uh, in a populist moment, there you don't have the option of a pure coalition. It doesn't matter if you're on the left.
I get
It
it.
doesn't matter if you're on the right. Right. Um, so what Ortland is doing is he's saying this pure coalition is serving my interests. This impure coalition is serving my interests. That impure coalition is opposing my interests. My
The same thing with
interests are
David French, because David French came on that and said, "This is the way." So David French,
yeah.
and it's
David
yeah,
French is a really good example, right? So, I have friends that know him personally, and they
yeah,
say,
me too.
I've known him personally. He's a solid Christian dude. Um, how do you make sense of it? Well, it's a populist moment. They're opposing populism, but there's no opposing populism that isn't also a populist coalition. In a populist moment, you're choosing populist coalitions, and and you can back out of it. I've seen a lot of Christians that say there isn't anyone for me. I understand that. I've actually done that in the past with my vote and said, there isn't anyone for me. There's no one I can stand before Jesus and say, hey, I voted for that guy. Right. I think visiting Iraq when they were restarting the schools um, changed my mind on some things, on some of the purity things. Um,
Are you just
but
gonna glaze over that? You're just gonna glaze
what was
over that?
that?
You're just gonna glaze over that? You just,
Uh,
well,
yeah.
we'll
So
come back to it. We'll come back
we can
to
come
it.
back to it.
Yeah, okay.
Um,
Iraq
because you
change,
start to
Jason.
realize the international effects of one leader versus another leader are so enormous that if you're not taking that into account, you're not loving you're not loving your neighbor. It's having you have something similar going on with the borders. Um, having porous borders um, is actually bad for the international peace. So
It's
and
bad
so
for
there's
everybody. Yeah, it's
it's
bad for
bad for
everybody.
everybody, right?
Yeah,
It's not just bad for America to have a broken immigration system. Um, it's bad for the entire world, right? Because if the you if things tip and fall here, the effects on there are people in perilous situations that need America to be strong, and um, and us opening our borders
makes us weak.
actually undermines some of the really important international relationships.
You know, can I
Um,
can I can I can I reframe that a little bit?
yeah,
Um, my house, the stronger that my house is to be self-sustaining, self-sufficient, and fruitful, is a blessing for everybody else around it.
right.
Right.
Yeah,
And when my
exactly.
house is not able to be self-sustaining, self-sufficient, and to produce goods and services for everybody, then I can't love my neighbor in a way that's better than I could love it if it was ransacked, right?
Right.
And it has implications to the whole neighborhood and surrounding neighborhoods, and keeps going. And
Yeah.
so the weaker my house is, the weaker the surrounding community is, the surrounding state is, or a surrounding nation, right? Like it goes into sphere sovereignty. It has an effect everywhere, and so it doesn't change. So that's how I think about it
Yeah.
too.
Well, even our ability to take care of actual refugees is
Right.
destroyed
Well, I
when
have to have a
we
strong house to do that.
yeah, exactly. And I don't know if you've seen the studies that they did on the broken windows and um, uh, well-kept sidewalks as deterrents to crime. Uh, but it's amazing.
A while ago, yes.
Yeah, it was amazing. Just that when the sidewalks are well kept, when the bushes and the trees that are on the sides of the streets that are the public um, public shrubbery, that sort of thing, are well kept, and when the windows are not broken, when graffiti is taken care of, crime goes down.
Yep.
Because the the when you there's something about broken windows that makes you think, well, the I'm already in a broken spot. I may as well rob
Might
this
as well.
dude,
Yeah. Well, and I think too, though, that I want to get back to the institutions real quick, but just people think then though what they can do is just go in and replace broken windows and clean up the sidewalks with the help of the government. And therefore, we got now a place where less crime will happen, and that's not the case. There's a sequential process that creates an environment of safety, and it's observed through how the community looks.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So there is a foundational reality that builds a culture and community a particular way that then reflects what kind of people we are. And then it says, well, you can't do that around here. It's like,
Right.
you know what I mean? That's just, these people don't
Yeah.
do that. You can't.
When a group of people is the kind of people that picks up litter as they walk around the city and puts it where it's supposed to go, in the garbage can. That kind of people has less crime.
Man,
Right.
Jason, why are you giving me? I don't want to talk about this yet. Okay. I'm going to tell you what I was going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to go back to what we were going to talk about, because otherwise we're going to go so many rabbit trails. But I've been really thinking about how that the customs that we have in here in America are not just secular ideas. This is a Christian concept and idea.
Yeah.
And a Christian culture of fruitfulness that produces the right kind of shame in a culture that makes people love their neighbors better. And we've taken for granted things like littering, right? The idea we really have a unique culture that's so Christian, but we don't think that not littering is a Christian concept, but it
Right.
really is. And it's been developed over hundreds of years of Christian law and loving your neighbor that has produced a society that we look at somebody who doesn't take their shopping cart back and we look at them and say, what kind of person doesn't take their shopping cart back? And it's just, we don't even say anything, but it's there. And if we're there with our shopping cart, was like, we feel the shame of just leaving your shopping cart just right there. And if you have a shopping cart in your lawn, we know what kind of person you are. And there's a certain things like, oh yeah, that's not good. Right. It's there. And I don't want to talk about it, but because I can go in, I've been really thinking about how simple things like littering and returning shopping carts and doing some of those things, those traditions aren't just secular traditions. Those are traditions that come out of a Christian worldview. And what a lot of people are noticing is like, man, I miss the kind of culture that was like this. And that's the edges of what happens with the law being applied in the Christian culture. Right.
But it actually goes all the way down. Like when this is a capitalism issue, all the way down, right? Because if you can't own your own property, then
Right.
unless you're only going to take care of it if there's outside pressure. The 5-day work week was developed by the Puritans because you needed one day to be able to improve the property that you owned. So you had this mindset that said, mowing your lawn on Saturdays, that's something that was developed. Gary North has a great little book on that called the Puritan experiment or something, the failed Puritan experiment, where the Puritans, when they first got here, they tried a kind of communist.
Yes, I read that. Didn't work out.
And it didn't work out. And they went to the scriptures and they studied it and they said, oh, it's because private property is a human, an imago Dei thing. Having something that you own, being able to own property is an imago Dei issue, and the denial of individual property was a denial of actually reality, right? You end up dehumanizing your neighbor, and I think it's such a fundamentally Christian idea that we've forgotten that it was attached
to so much
to the Bible.
Okay, let's not go down too far down that rabbit trail,
that.
because I can spend a lot of time there, because I don't think what comes out of cultures, the way that you God's law ultimately bleeds through a law, ultimate bleeds through a standard, ultimate bleeds through, and praise God for America because we've seen it self-correct from saying, yeah, that wasn't biblical. We need to fix like socialism. That didn't
Yeah,
work.
it
That didn't
didn't
work.
work.
Almost killed off a whole colony, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, they almost,
And it,
a lot of them starved to death.
starved to death. They realized that it wasn't working. And so because of that, we've been able to self-correct. And we've been handed down. This is where a lot of this is a breaking of the fifth commandment because we've been handed down people who have lived through this. And our forefathers have given us like, hey, son, don't do this. This has been like proverbial wisdom in a lot of ways. Said, let us show you how living Christian benefits your society, right? According to God's law, living this way has been really good for us. And they've shaped a lot of this into law to give us, right? And to say, here goes wisdom, follow it, and your societies will do well. So, but let's just pause there for a second because I want to talk about some of this at the conference, and I don't want to give it all away because part of the things that we need to repent of, I believe, in America, is the breaking of the fifth commandment. We have been handed down so many blessed traditions, and we've looked at our forefathers and said, yeah, that don't work for us. And then we see our society collapse and we're worrying and we're wondering why is it collapsing so much is because we've let go of the blessing that our forefathers have given us in working historically. I believe through the work of the Holy Spirit, historically working in our society, building up a certain type of Christian environment that is good for everybody. We've rejected it. And it's in one sense, some of it's blasphemy, right? And then you get in judgment because you don't listen to,
Yeah.
you don't honor God. If you're going to break the fifth commandment, guess what you deserve? The death penalty. Like that's what happens when you start doing that. So anyway, but I want to go back to the idea that you were saying that the institutions, populism comes up. It's a negative, it's a negative fix to remove institutions that are failing its people, and then you need a church that has um, a positive vision on where to move to.
Yeah.
So
Because if you think about it, the Ten Commandments have there is a cosmological, uh, uh, there are a set of cosmological assumptions embedded into the Ten Commandments. And um, so when the church, yeah, and the work of Jesus, the has the same embedded cosmological assumptions, the letters of Paul, the
it's all
prophets,
working through yeah.
it's all they assume um the world is a particular kind of place. There's a deep interconnectedness. There's a deep interconnectedness across time, right? And so the fifth commandment assumes that the interconnectedness across time, God's faithfulness across time, and that our faithfulness ends up reflecting God's faithfulness across time. The thou shalt not steal assumes private property. This was in, if you read old books on when pastors would write books opposing communism in the 50s and 60s. Uh, those are the sorts of arguments that they would make is well, thou shalt not steal assumes that you can own things, and communism
That's not,
assumes
yeah,
yeah.
right,
So
right.
we know from the beginning it's offering a different view of the world. Populism um, doesn't bring with it a positive vision for the institutional growth, for the um, intergenerational connectedness, right? It doesn't have that. It has to come from someplace else. And the when populism causes problems like it did in the Second Great Awakening, it's when the church doesn't have an institutional um, an institutional response that can say, well, actually, we have been serving people.
Okay, so let me. This is where it gets interesting for me. So I brought you through the social justice movement running through evangelicalism. I think it has separated and segregated the church in a horrible way.
Right.
And then you have this movement inside of churches to to give them a negative positive vision. Does that make sense? A one that's not biblical, right?
Yeah.
And then you have Megan Basham. I think you have first, it starts off with, in a big way, Resolution 9 in the SBC. It was kind of like we start seeing the woke movement really creeping in the SBC. A lot of guys who we thought were on our side in the institutions were not. Tom Askell kind of really takes the reins and leads that with by what standard. Doesn't really get all the way at the root of it. Megan Basham comes back then a few years later, writes her book, Shepherds for Sale. So then she takes a lot of the institutional leaders that we thought were on our side, that we thought were Christians, a lot of the scientists too, some of the scientists, and guys who we thought were sound Christian guys, and shows that these guys have been bought, or it seems like that they are somehow not serving the interests of the people who have put them there. And so in this turn, the church doesn't seem like it's an institution either that can be trusted to be able to give a positive vision after the institutions have been rejected. So now what? Because this is not looking good.
I think we are still we are still in the long shadow of the last two populist revolutions and the church's failure. So in a lot of ways, we came into this one already not trusting the institutional church. What the big difference I think that's happening this time is you're seeing all sorts of young people join churches. Other institutional or the other populist revolutions, the 1850s, the 1920s, you have these populist revolutions where the Second Great Awakening, it comes out with more Christians, people claiming Christ and not going to church, believing you can be a Christian and not go to church.
So
you have some of this in the First Great Awakening too. What was that?
So it loses the institutions in one sense.
So loses the institutions. So the populist revolution of the 1850s is what led to the church in America being removed from its public institution position, right? So it was privatized, and in many ways it was turned into a corporation at that point. Now it's a corporation, right? Most people, they get a 501c3 when they're starting a church, right? And I'm not, it's whether you do that or not for practical purposes is, I don't think is that important of a question.
But it's still saying something though.
But it is what it's saying is the position that churches hold in America is the position of a corporation
given to them by the government.
Given to them by the government,
right?
Or at least acknowledged by the government, right? But the nature of the church as a separate public institution over against the family and the civic sphere, and then other kinds of public institutions. I think the New York Times would be example at having, it was a public institution at one point. Now
Fourth Estate, that's an institution, right?
What was that?
They live inside of the Fourth Estate. They have
in the Fourth Estate. Yeah. So, and so that's why it upsets people so much when it turns out it's a corporation. When people say, newsertainment is actually serving the people that buy commercials, right? You say,
Big
that
pharma.
Is actually, that's true, right? So if 75% of all commercials on television are purchased by big pharma, then they're going to that's going to affect them, right? That's true. That's the reality where we're at right now, right? So 75% of the money that keeps television going is big pharma money. So if that's the case, then we stop believing that they serve our interests. They're serving big pharma's interests. What are big pharma's interests? All right. And so you start falling down what interest are you serving if it's not me, if it's not me as the consumer? So those, when things fall apart like that, the church in the last two populist uprisings has failed. Um, but a lot of young people, young men especially, are joining churches right now. Right, you see people moving towards the institutional church. I think this is the attraction of Roman Catholicism. It's the attraction of Eastern Orthodoxy. That it's unfortunate that now even the Roman Catholics are looking at their Pope, going, "You're not serving our interests anymore. You're the vicar of Christ who seems to be a mouthpiece for communism." That this is
I don't have a problem with that populist uprising. I don't have a
right, but the question is, can a populist uh, can an institution respond by presenting a positive vision? I think the this pope is obviously not going to, but I actually think the last pope was presenting a populist, or was presenting
a positive.
a positive institutional vision, and that's the reason that so many young men especially moved towards Roman Catholicism. Um, this is so if you read young G.K. Chesterton versus old G.K. Chesterton, young G.K. Chesterton was his mind was developed in the midst of a populist uprising. Old G.K. Chesterton became much less populist and much more institutional. So he and you can track it in his writings just by reading tons of them and knowing what date he wrote things in. It doesn't mean he's not wise all the way through, because he is actually generally wise. Even as a young man, he was wise and was wary of the populist uprising, while also saying, "I'm a joiner of it." Right? He knew he was joining it, but he was trying to present through his journalistic institution, because he ran a newspaper. He was consistently trying to present a positive vision for the populists while acknowledging that the populist coalition
It failed.
it was right about the institutions that weren't serving them and needed a positive vision to be effective in the long run. And we're not really, I mean, I'm hoping that churches are starting to do that. You do see churches that are trying to do that. And I think it's that I heard a great lecture from a guy at Bethlehem College on reading Jordan Peterson through Augustine's lens, right? Taking, he's saying Augustine gives us a way to integrate an unbeliever's thought and to test it, right? And so he says, how would Augustine read Jordan Peterson? It was really a great lecture. But he talks about, if you've got an entire generation that is being helped by the guru style of teaching of Jordan Peterson, and if we don't stop and say why, then we are failing that generation. We need to stop and say, what is he giving them? And then he showed how Peterson is offering an integrated cosmos, and that we as Christians reject hearing that that's what the next generation wants at our peril, because we actually have one of those. Like, we believe in an integrated cosmos in theory, like technically, and Peterson presents a vision for an integrated cosmos without the metaphysics behind it. And then we say, but he's not a Christian. And so instead of saying, well, what would it look like for the church to be consistently presenting an integrated cosmological vision that affected everything from the way you made your bed when you woke up in the morning to the way that you laid down and died at the end of your life? We have that, but do we present it, or are we going to join the conservative movement, which lives completely in response, doesn't know what to do? I think this is why you have all of the upheaval at the Daily Wire. You've got some of them that are saying, well, but hey, the populists have a point, and some of them that are saying populists are are dirty because they are, right? Like, there's no way to not. Populist movements are coalitions of people that hate the same thing, and so you're going to end up. I mean, they're messy, and so you've got to be ready to sort through it, or say I would rather that my institution just um, survive. They don't. No institution will come out the other side of this unchanged. So the church can either use it for a self-reflective moment and get sanctified, or the modernist movement in the church that was being opposed by Machen was the church trying to say we will not join this populist coalition that's going on everywhere, right? So they started. That's where the term fundamentalist as an insult shows up. Um, it's the church saying those fundamentalists that are part of the populist movement, we're not them. We are still respectable. We still hold to the old institutions, but the old institutions weren't serving the people anymore.
Mm.
And interestingly enough, the modernists used psychology as the way to hide their denial of psychology was the lever that they used to open the institution enough to bring in the Machiavellian vision, which is how institutions justify not serving people. Or institutions can justify not serving people if they have a Machiavellian worldview or Machiavellian cosmological assumptions. And that's what they use psychology as the way, as the lever to get that denial of the cosmos, in denial of the kind of fundamentally integrated understanding that I think we have something very similar going on in the evangelical church now. Is we've bought into all of the assumptions. I mean, the fight over whether or not you could compromise with evolution was the same fight that happened, in the late 1800s with whether or not you could compromise with the violence based world that was being brought forth and presented at the time. So you had they compromised on eugenics, they compromised on the imperial, all sorts of imperialism, all sorts of things, and then psychology was the way that they were able to get it to kind of the regular person in the pew. And then shame, you didn't want to be called a fundamentalist.
Are we so can we take it back to where we started at then? And because I think that's helping understand the moment. Now, how do you get out of it? Because now you do have tragedies. Your institutions really are failing you in real time. And it's great to understand what's happening, but I think we feel, if it's true that George W. Bush didn't like black people, and Kanye states the obvious, which I don't know if that's true or not. I can't argue that one way or another to find it's true. Doesn't really change the moment at all. right? Like just because he's stating it.
For Christians, you mean? Like what? How do we
Well, yeah,
live in
well,
the
yeah, because I'm
a
thinking
moment like
about
this?
taking it. Yeah, well, because I'm taking it now. You really do have a group of people, in the eastern coast of America that are really taking a big hit right now. Um, and I, I'm trying to figure out how we manage because we do part of okay. Let me reframe it. Part of me wants to think about the idea that um, I I do want the institutions to be reformed. I do want the institutions to change. I think that there has to have something, and watching kind of some of the Christian institutions go through this. So you have the SBC, they're one side or the other. So what ended up happening in the SBC was both sides start saying, "Hey, this is a populist, or this is the institutions aren't working for us." Whether the liberal side said that or the conservative side said that, what ended up happening was that the liberals got their hands mostly on it and destroyed a large portion of the SBC. And I don't know if it's going to work any better now. And so, and yet there's still real issues that are going on. You just say, okay, do we burn the whole thing down now? Um,
Well,
like, because
that's
if because
what that's
I'm
the
moving to, like, let's say that it's right that uh, Biden's administration really doesn't care about the white folks out there in South Carolina and in the South, and like let's just say he just doesn't care. They're white, they're Trump supporters. This is more evidence that the institution has failed.
right. Well, at this point, everything becomes evidence that the institution has failed, right?
Sure, I
So
mean,
now
COVID should have.
that's kind of yeah. Um, the and the COVID, I think, was kind of the match that lit the fire of the populist movement, because all of a sudden you look around and say, if you cared about us, this is not what you would do, right? And
Mm-hmm.
everybody said that, but people on both sides said that, right? Both sides said, if you really cared about us, you would lock up all the people that won't get vaccinated. And the other side said, if you really cared about us, you wouldn't lock down all of the businesses, right? Everybody said, whatever it is you're doing, it's not to serve the population, right? All the institutions. And so, but the fundamental institutional change is happening now because you've already had, the calendar has been rebuilt, the schedule has been rebuilt, you've got now all kinds of school systems that have gotten rid of summer vacation, um, and there, so the rebuilding of society is well underway. So the question is going to be, can the church stand as a public institution, um, and not also be melted down? Uh, well, can it's being melted down, I think, by the populist movement as much as anything. But can it stand as a public institution on the other side of it? And then can our families stand as institutions, coming out the other side of it as well? Uh, you know, the attack on the family that we see is a part of all of this, right? It's a part of the populist, thing. So I think the state of Washington just declared that now every kid in the public schools has to go through, a, a gender test, and find out what their gender is in like third or fourth grade or something, right? Got that sort of thing going on. That's a we no longer trust the institution of the family because
Yep.
it doesn't have the kid's best interest in mind, right? So it doesn't matter if you're left or right. You've got these populist, um, this populist sentiment. They just disagree about which institution should the weight of,
Mm.
everything fall on as we come out the other side. And um, the church is an institution that can do this by faith. The family is an
Mm,
institution that can do this by faith because it's got promises. And I think the state can do this by faith. I don't know if our state can,
mm.
because of the way that we have lit on fire our legal history. So, can you do this in a legal way? Um, and so a lot of people say no. That's why we need, somebody to show up and be the right kind of tyrant. But that is not. That's you're no longer in the English legal tradition. The that's maybe Roman or French or Spanish legal traditions in the West have space for that. You don't really have that in the um, English legal tradition, away or the Scottish or the Irish. You don't have room for a legal way for a tyrant to set things right, the way some other legal traditions have a space for that. So
You know,
it would
you know,
it would
you
be
know.
illegal. So I think that's why you have to look at your church and say, how can we grow our community, grow our wisdom? How can we be a support to families? How can we be a staple in this neighborhood of stability? And say, as the fire comes through by faith, we know that the church is going to make it, the family's going to make it. We can trust Jesus. That the church is always like a phoenix; it comes out of the fire. The family is always like a phoenix that comes out of the fire. And the state has been historically too. It just the fires are just often much bigger.
So, with what you just said, how can you really sit this election out then? I don't know if you really can. I don't know if, because you're asking a different question about when you're in that kind of movement where everything's a populist movement, your vote is not necessarily about the person.
Yeah, well, it's not a
Because
vote
I,
for anything in a populist setting.
right,
That's
right.
that's I mean, that's
I think
why
some people,
everybody
yeah, go ahead.
that's why everybody keeps saying, "Hey, give me a positive thing that your candidate is going to do. I'll wait." I hate that. That's just stupidest.
Yeah, I don't want
I
them to,
hate
yeah.
but I just hate the "I'll wait" thing because it's so. But anyway, that's just
I
for me
just don't like them
personally.
to providing a positive, you
Yeah,
know,
every time that they're like, "Well, here's the positives," um, you know, everybody says, "But don't you understand that that person is an evil end to reality, an evil end to civilization?" Um, that's why everybody's voting against. Nobody's voting for. That's just part of the deal in a populist coalition. You can't build a populist coalition with a positive vision, and so you don't. Um,
so
the
that interesting. So
so
that, go ahead.
yeah, so there are gonna be Christians that sit it out because of their convictions, and and I'm not.
But as if so, then somebody like Ortland or French, they just picked the wrong side, though, didn't they?
I think that they are um that they are on the side of trying to keep the globalist institutions intact. Um,
I just don't
so
understand that. I just
uh,
don't understand how. But yeah, they feel like that those institutions have failed them. That's why they're following this populist movement.
well, I think what they would say is the institutions that are failing are conservatism, right?
Mm,
That
mm.
conservatism has failed them, and so we're voting for the other side, to try and get conservatism back on track, that sort of thing. But that's because they're thinking of conservatism as an institution. Um,
instead of.
And I think conservatism pitched itself as an institution to
Right.
its own peril, right? Like I think the Republican Party is one of the institutions that's failing people, and so people are voting against the Republican Party,
That's
right?
what Trump is. Yeah, they're voting against the Republican Party with Trump.
Well, I think the people that are voting for Democrats, that they're like, you see a lot of people. I'm historically Republican, but I'm voting against Trump because he is ruining the
Yeah, I see.
Republican
Oh, I see
Party,
what you're
right?
saying. Yeah, right.
And you see this RFK Jr. What happened to my party? I'm now
Tulsa
find
Gabbard. Yeah.
myself in this on the other side of this populist revolution. I mean, it does actually look like they tried to get him killed, which I think is, I mean, I don't actually think that's as insane as I would have thought it was 2 years
His name
ago,
is
maybe.
Kennedy.
Right? Yeah.
Of
They're
course they
always,
did. That's
um,
historical.
but I mean, I just read a really, really good book on
I'll give it to you.
Watergate that
Oh,
was, it was phenomenal.
by who?
And I'm looking up the name of the author right now. Um, it is by Jeff Shepard, and he
Okay.
was a part of the legal team that put the Watergate defense together. But what happened was the because of um, because of executive session, uh, they were able to the people that brought the charges that got Watergate moved the Watergate charge, the people that made the anti-Nixon charges because of executive session and uh the the executive session of a particular kind of judge and jury relationship, they were able to hide their arguments, and they weren't opened until recently, right? So
Mm,
the arguments for Nixon's guilt had been hidden, right? So and they finally opened and released it, and so Jeff Shepard wrote the Nixon Conspiracy, um, and to show and just went through the actual arguments that were used to quote unquote prove Nixon's guilt, and showed that since then every single fact that they had rested on has been disproven. So
mm,
Nixon's guilt in Watergate, which has been assumed now for decades, um, was based on faulty legal reasoning, but they hid the legal reasoning, and it was faulty legal reasoning and fake evidence. But they hid because the legal reasoning was in executive session, that it hadn't ever been able to be tested, and so now he says there's this smoking gun that's now in the public, um, that shows that everything that was used to take down Nixon um, turned out to have been uh, resting on these false executive conclusions, these false conclusions that happened in executive session. It's an amazing book, and it's very well footnoted. And um,
who'd you say the other was?
but
I'm trying to find.
Jeff Shepard,
Man, it seems like it's taking
and
too long for that to come out.
well, you think, how long, and it only came out because um, some lawyers finally said, hey, we need to be able to see this stuff because that case has been used over and over and over as precedent. So we need to understand the legal reasoning behind it. And they blocked it and blocked it and blocked it. And then they finally, had to open it. And and you realize it's all this faulty legal reasoning and fake evidence. And the evidence is all footnoted, but it's all footnoted in a circle. so the evidence is all self-referential. Um,
Like a dossier.
yeah, exactly. So um so when you but that part of the story of America, Watergate, huge scandal, can't believe that the president was involved in it. Look what the president did, all the secret recordings of the president that he was using. And they actually, they finally end up releasing all of that, and over and over Nixon is saying, tell the truth, put it on the table, release everything, put it on the table. um
Wait,
and
is this
we
guy? Is this the guy that was on Tucker, Jeff Fisher?
I have no idea,
You know,
honestly.
Tucker did a whole thing with a guy on who was Jeff Fisher one of the guys who was a part of it?
Jeff Shepard.
Shepard, I'm sorry,
I
Shepard.
I don't know. So I saw. So
I think
I
it was
it may have been.
the Nixon. Yeah, the Nixon conspiracy. Tucker Carlson. Jeff. That's not him. Keep going. I'm gonna find it. I think that was because Tucker did a whole thing with the guy who basically did all the research and was there. Um,
Yeah. Well, so things like that are coming out, it ends up reframing the whole story of these institutions. And so now the question then
yep,
becomes, in a
that's him.
populist movement, the question becomes, he was on Tucker. I'm gonna have to watch that.
Dude, I'll share this with you. Yeah, he did a whole 2.5 hours on this with Tucker, and his memory is amazing. Like he's just sitting there and he's just pulling this stuff out of his memory. He did all the research. Geoff Shepard,
Yeah.
Shepard. Yeah, he saw it happen. And so he just lays out in 2.5 hours everything.
Oh yeah,
And
I'm gonna have to watch that.
so I wanted to get his book because I saw it, and he just lays out what I didn't know either about Nixon was just that he was a popular president, like from both sides, probably one of the most popular presidents we had in a long time. And this is kind of one of the things that I think this is really about Trump saying like the deep state didn't want him, and this was their way of getting rid of him, and he took the fall because of other people in his own party that were acting
Well,
nefarious
but and
around him.
this is part of the argument for why they ended up finally unlocking this, or releasing these legal documents, was because this was all of this was used to reshape and reorder the way you could give money to political candidates, because you had so many Democrats that were secretly giving money to Nixon, see, donors, but you used to be able to keep your political donations
Private.
private, and the Democratic Party wanted to punish Democrats that gave money to Nixon, and so they made it so that that all of it could become public, because Nixon was siphoning so much money away, because the Democrats were like, well, yeah, I'm with the Democratic Party and always have been, and I still will be, but this candidate is going to serve me better in this moment. And so um, you had nefarious bundlers who started using Mexican bank accounts to funnel Democratic money through to Nixon, and that becomes part of this story. And but Nixon knows none of this. None of
Right.
this is, this is all stuff that is happening at, lower local levels, and then, uh, the outer ring of the president levels.
Yep. Yep.
So there were definitely people that committed crimes, whether or not the CIA, um, you know, uh, you had kind of like ex CIA assets that the CIA said, well, they used to be assets, but they're not anymore.
Yeah,
Now
that's right.
they
Yeah.
got caught. Now they got caught in there doing this thing, and they definitely weren't CIA assets anymore, right? But all of this becomes part of the story of why it is that we don't trust um, the FBI, we don't trust the CIA, we don't trust the executive branch, we don't trust that why it all becomes instead a part of the story of the deep state's infiltration, so that we can't trust any of our institutions anymore. Um,
Which kind of
the
like, come on, like, do you need to make a better argument here?
but that's the thing, is I fully agree that we can't trust our institutions anymore. That's I don't think that is the question that's up for debate. The question is,
What's the
as
way forward?
Christians, can we join a populist coalition that is obviously full of people that we are not on the same side with on all sorts of moral issues, all sorts of other civic issues, right? You've got people that are big government people, but they're conservative big government people. Um, you've got people arguing for fascism and just thinking that Trump would be a better fascism in the technical economic
Yeah,
sense,
yeah,
not in
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
whatever the word people are trying to make it mean now. You've
Or
part of the coalition,
arguing in favor of mercantilism, who like
right?
it.
Are arguing in favor of
Terrorists,
mercantilism.
terrorists, terrorists. Like,
Right. So you go, okay, well, you guys remember World War I was caused by that, right? But you've got all of these different things going on, and can Christians join a populist coalition or not is, I think, one of the questions to have and debates to have. And then if that's the case, which do we join the globalist side that says
no,
um,
no, no,
right, no, I'm with you, but I
no.
think we have to actually make the argument, right? That you've got one
You just
side
said
that is
globalist. That
saying,
is the argument. You just said globalist. That's it. Like, there's like, no. Like, yeah,
but
everything ethical about your Christian position doesn't allow you to be a globalist. I don't understand. Like, that's not even a question.
right,
Okay, what
but
did
I
I do?
think that argument isn't being the assumptions are not so. Aristotle in his rhetoric talks about, to be effective in rhetoric, you have to be aware of the enthymemes, which are the assumed uh, the assumed statements, the propositions that are assumed, and
Jason, I
whether or
get it.
not they're shared,
I got
right?
it. So you
Because
saying I'm not a good rhetorician. I
if
got
they're
it. All right.
well, if the enthymeme is unshared, if the assumption is unshared, then your argument won't be convincing. And so if you've got unshared assumptions, then you actually need to make the argument at that position, at that place, at the unshared assumption, not at the so if
You're
you
right.
understand
I get it.
your
You're right.
audience,
I get
then
it.
well, here's the assumptions that we share, and I don't have to make arguments for those assumptions. And that's a good use of the enthymeme. A bad use of the enthymeme is when you think you don't share these, you don't know what assumptions are unshared, and so you don't make the argument, and then you accuse people of just being stupid or evil or something because they don't
But they
share the
are.
assumptions. But like, because I think a lot of people would say, you know, um, Trump is trying to fundamentally change the nature of America, which is always the accusation against populism,
Mm.
right? Against a populist movement. They're trying to fundamentally change the nature of the institutions. And then the other side says, no, you're the ones that are trying to fundamentally change the nature of, that's why we're opposing you.
You're
And they
right.
end up opposing each other because they're trying to change, not because of what they're trying to put in its place. Well, so our rhetoric ends up being unconvincing because we're not actually making the argument that, so the reason that we don't trust the institutions is because they're serving some other um, they're serving somebody besides us, right? They have good reason to not serve the me or my, the population. On the left, the argument is Trump isn't trying to serve the population, and the Republican Party is not trying to serve the population. They're serving special interest groups. They're serving, whatever it is. On the right, our argument has been they're serving globalist uh, uh they're serving globalist um special interests, right? The interests. So instead of serving the population's interests, they're serving the interests of the globalists, and the
Right.
globalists do not have the population's interest in mind. And then and we we don't make the argument well that supporting this populist coalition will lead to everyone being served better, right? Because we only put it in the negative. And the left does that as well, right? Why is it that because there are people that will say, yeah, sure, there are some globalist interests there, but we'll be better off with the globalist interests served than
So, Jason,
Trump's interests served.
I feel you. I think that I understand you, and I feel you on that. Brother, got to put on some lotion because it's getting cold, and I was starting to turn white. But I feel like that we're back at the place again where we were having the conversation with pro-aborts, that is arguing in some sense. We thought that if we could convince them that there was a human being in the side of a woman, that then we would have won the argument and win them to our side, because these people, in one sense, just lacked a good argument for the Imago Dei.
Right.
But what we realized was these people give no damns about the Imago Dei,
Right.
and they're totally fine killing it.
They're not. It turns out there's a whole group of people that actually don't oppose murder. So showing them that it's murder isn't a problem.
No, because they're just like, fine.
Yeah.
Then I'm a murderer, whatever. But I have the right to kill it, right? And it's like, now we switched and said, okay, if that's the kind of people we're working with, then we're going to straight take the law and say you can't kill somebody, period. Yeah. So then the vision of our approach to go to the individual has switched now to saying we're just going to go right to the courts. We're going to go right to the laws, and we're going to force you now not to kill another human being, because you are not a reasonable person at all, because you don't mind killing little ones in their most vulnerable state, in the state they're supposed to have the most safety. You say it's a death tomb. So yeah, I'm fine going this direction. So the people that I think a lot of us feel like we're dealing with are those kind of people, again, though, at a different scale. Didn't work at the life. It's not going to work in civic environment. They are going to say, I don't understand why we can't have porous borders. Right? This seems like a really good idea. It's like, well, because it's not loving. And like
the whole phrase, the whole phrase, no person is illegal, is, I think, a good example of that.
Right.
Say, well, except for the people that are breaking the law.
Right.
But
I don't think we can make an argument. And maybe I'm wrong on this, but I don't think we can make an argument to those people.
But we're not. The arguments are not for those people, even though they're with those people.
Okay.
The argument is about the 16 to 20-year-old young dude who's saying, I've still got my whole life ahead of me. Right. This is important to me because I've got my whole life ahead of me. What's your vision? What's your actual vision for the future? Right. The most of the populist uprising is folks that have been in this for a while, and so they're like, well, I'm falling on this side or that side of the coalition, and I've only got 15 years left, and so I think we've got to be making the arguments. We've got to be setting out the positive vision. We've got to be making the argument. We've got to be talking through the issue, and presenting the law and the justice and mercy of God consistently for the audience as much as for the person we're talking to.
I don't disagree with that. I'm fine with that, but then there won't be part of what I think a lot of the young guys are seeing who are who need that kind of training. They're saying, if we don't do something fairly quickly here, there won't be a place for me to practice what it is that you're telling me to do. And
That
I don't
may or that may or may not be that really may or may not be true. And I mean, I don't think, um, I mean, I have been arguing against globalism since before it was hip.
right.
But I think that, what the biggest thing that, I've always tried to do is never just let it become a negative argument, but say, here's the positive vision for it all. Gather to the table and walk away blessed with a vision for reality. Gather, look at baptism, look at the Lord's Supper, look at the nature of the pulpit, look at the community of Christ's people. That is the future. That is the future that we are tasting in advance. Now let's go out and build it into our families, build it to whatever jurisdiction you have, right? I think if we're not also making a long play at the same time, um, then we're going to end up, you might win one populist revolt, but end up without, you end up unprepared. I mean, this is why I've been involved in, I've always tried to keep a teenage Bible study going and be involved in classical Christian schools. And, because I think we have to actually put our energy into a long term, a long play, a long game. uh, and why some of the, I think some of the rhetoric of people who I love and care about that are in the, abolitionist movement, that that you've got people, that they're willing to say, if you're not playing the immediatist game all the time, you're being unfaithful. I think we need people working on that, right? Trying to get laws passed all the time, and and we also need a long game being played. Because faithfulness is, half steps in the same direction for a long time. Um, the the it, and we've been taking half steps in the wrong direction for good with good intentions for so long that I think we have a long hike out of this mess. Um,
So,
and
so then when you hear things like, yeah, Jason, with you, but we got to stop these guys. Like we got to stop them. Like if they continue on, there won't be, if they can play the games where we're not going to care about the folks that are getting drowned out and they're supposed to be folks who service us all, then there's no way we're going to have any ground in the future. So, yeah, I might not be completely supporting everything that Trump does, but he's clearly going to try and clean out the swamp. He's clearly got a lot of Christians around him. And if they get a globalistic foothold inside of America, like they've been trying to do and overrun our borders, there won't be a way for me to buy a home for a family that I need to take care of and invite
right,
people into it and do spread the gospel. If those things are taken away, then everything you're saying that I need to be doing for long term, I can't do it even in the short interim. So something has to be done.
right. No, I think well, there's two things. One is the part of why we're in this mess is because we didn't we weren't paying attention to all of the different levels, right? So, um
Mm,
I just saw somebody, I was just talking to somebody who was saying, um that in their local area there was a, the local, when the local races for politics ran, um it was in an off year, and no conservatives even ran because they had kept, and so what the left had decided to do was to not remind anybody that a vote was coming, because when that happens, then conservatives go, "Oh yeah, there's a vote coming," and so they tried they tried. What if we run no ads and only leftists run in all of the local elections? And so you had a complete overhaul of the entire local election, local um, rulers in one election cycle. Um, so the entire school board was replaced, and it was all radical trans activists, and they just never reminded anybody that there was a vote coming. And so no conservatives ran it. And so I think we've got to actually be paying attention to the civic sphere, treating it like it's important and that it's part of what we do, and not just something that comes around with the president, you know, once a year. And then the church needs to be taking itself as a public institution seriously, and living a public faith, that actually believes its job is to disciple its city, right? All of those sorts of things. And then when you say, "Oh shoot, the basement's flooding," um, which I think is the kind of situation we're in now, you say, "Okay, the basement's flooding. We got to do whatever we have to get the water out of the basement," um, and then not forget to patch up the things when it's not flooding. And right now people only show up if they think the basement is flooded.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
and so those are the sorts of things that I think we actually we can't say, "Oh good, we won an election. Whew, now we can ignore the civic sphere, go back to ignoring the civic sphere."
I
Um,
don't think anybody, honestly, I really don't think that anybody is thinking that way. I think that most people think we have to win an election, not just nationally, but locally as well, so that we can implement the things that protect us from anything else that is going to be against our uh, interests.
yeah,
American interests, Christian interests,
yeah.
family interests, institutional interests, right? We have to win so that we can set up, because I think a lot of people are waking up, so we can set up the kind of leaders we need to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again, and start building something over the next 20 or 30 years.
But we have to, so and Christians have to be doing that, but we can't think that the populist coalition is going to do that.
No, but it's going to be a ramming ball to help
It's
us. Yeah.
right. That, so long as that's how we're thinking about it, then I think, I mean, I think Christians get involved with populist coalitions, and that we have throughout history. And it's always been really hard on the church, because you have, because it's a hard thing to navigate. But um, I think that we have every moral right to get involved with a populist coalition and charge in, as long as we go in knowing that coming out the other side of this, um, we want to be in a spot where we say, "And here is what the Bible says about this sort of thing," right? So I mean, I think that's one of the things that was amazing with Trump's first presidency, was Roe versus Wade got overturned at the Supreme Court. I did not believe that that was possible. I thought, I mean, long run, I believed it was going to happen. I did not believe it was possible in that short of an amount of time. Um, but that's the sort of thing that happens, because I also wasn't thinking about, I didn't understand the populist nature of Trump. Um,
Nobody did, I think, at that time.
yeah, well, I had the first time I heard somebody um, explain why Trump was so effective, um, was he was the son of the Archbishop of Uganda, for the International Anglican Church. I was sitting having dinner with him, and he was saying, I don't understand how Americans don't realize that Trump is going to win. And from his position, he could look and say, the groundswell that's coming for Trump is going to be something that you haven't ever seen. And he said it's because he's the first president that's come along and has worked on he understands that the currency of the world, that the currency of world politics is respect. Right.
Mm.
And none of you, since none of your other politicians understand that. And Trump understands that he is going to run away with this thing. And I think he actually did really run away with it in a way that nobody predicted, because he was dealing in a different currency altogether. So that was the first I heard. That was the first thing that kind of made me say, wait, what is going on? That is different than what we've seen with presidents since, since the 40s, maybe, the 40s, 50s. You've got, it's been a long time since you've had anyone thinking that way. So, looking back, I can see that was the beginning of, I think, the populist wave. And now I think we're at the peak of it. So we've got to say, if I'm whatever, however I'm joining this thing, it's so that when this crashes, I want to be in a place where I can bring biblical wisdom to bear. And that means you got to be getting the biblical wisdom. You've got to be working on, studying and working towards it. Not because the populist wave will crash. And the last populist wave, when it crashed, it turned out Trump was surrounded by Christians and helped him make some really great decisions for the Supreme Court that got Roe v. Wade overturned, that protected this rights of citizenry ever since. We've got really good stuff going on.
Got to work on that budget. Got to work on that budget. That's spending budget. We got to work on the spending budget. Do you think, though, that so then populism is a wrecking ball, and both sides are fighting over what they want to use that wrecking ball to do, so that they can build a particular type of nation out of whatever is removed? So then,
what do they want flattened so that they can start a new project?
But that just means that there is a moral side to this that is right, and an immoral side to this that is wrong. So, watching Christians, I guess one way line up on, I guess everybody can have different reasons, but I just don't understand how, guys like Ortland and French and Russell Moore, like they are showing, though, to me, that whatever their vision is for the future in Christianity lines up far more with the things that we want to destroy from the institutions that's failed us.
Well, I think and like some of these guys, I'm just learning who they are, so I don't have context.
Yeah. Sure.
So, but somebody saying, I want the Republican Party to be flattened so that we can build a better conservatism. I think they're making a significant error of judgment. Because the globalist wrecking ball doesn't stop there, right? But so the thing that the globalist wrecking ball is aimed at, one of the things is conservatism, right? One of the things is the Republican Party. It will destroy the Republican Party, but it's also going to take down the family unit, right? It's also going to take down the Constitution, right? It's also going to take down the legal, the shape of our legal system, right? So it's a different sort of legal system altogether. Even you've got people arguing that that the president that the president ought to have the right to dissolve the Supreme Court, right? You've
I
got
see
people
that.
start,
Yeah, yeah, you see
yeah,
that a lot.
starting to make that argument, or to stack the court, right? So those sorts of things that there's no brakes on the globalist agenda, and that I think is the argument that we need to be really putting forward, and making clear that the globalist agenda um, benefits from kids being transed, right? The globe,
From you
so
on welfare, from taxes going
for,
up, from
right,
right.
so all it benefits from all those things, and historically, that kind of fascism always makes some very, very rich people and some very, very poor people. So a guy like Mark Cuban, he supports it for a reason. He's going to get wealthier, and while the normal day-to-day people get poorer, right? That so we need to be making those arguments, I think, in a clear, concise, consistent way. Um, that because people don't understand. Um, so, while understanding we're joining a coalition that also has people in it that would be globalists if the globalism was a little bit of a different shade, right?
Right, right,
People that
right.
that um that people that don't, that also are destroying their families and the families around them, right? So there are people in our coalition that don't understand what it is that um, they understand what they're opposing. They don't understand
What they're trying to build.
what they're trying to build, and I think that
Although I will say that some of those guys that are around some of the tenets of Christianity, like freedom of speech in one sense, or a free market. I mean, one of the arguments that I'm trying to put through to communicate to people is like, if we can have free markets, truly free markets, the communication, the goodwill, the ability to prolong time to convince people and share the gospel is a huge opportunity for us in free markets, right?
yep,
And the more that we can create those, the better that we have the opportunity of winning long term, right? Which is one of the things I'm really grateful for with Elon Musk. The more
yep,
that Elon Musk is building around a free market, the better it's going to be for us at the end of the day.
the and when the Roman Empire fell, it was it was the people that were effectively using the market that grew up after the imperial collapse that spread the gospel out to the tribes throughout Europe and beyond. So, um, God has consistently used uh, market forces to
Yeah.
spread His gospel. Um, and I think I think so. But those are, I think we need to be making those arguments and showing a reasonable that there's a reasonable um, that it's reasonable to join this coalition, and that coalition is unreasonable to join. That because here's the reasons, right? And understanding that it's a coalition, so that if they say, hey, well, hey, your side isn't pure either.
No, you're right.
See,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. That is true,
I do
and
feel like though I have a better opportunity to win the people who are on this side than I do of winning the people that are completely headlong on the other side, right? Like I have a better chance. I feel like I have a better chance of talking human flourishing with somebody like Elon Musk than I do with Mark Cuban, right? There's a
yeah.
big difference in
Well,
that.
there is was, um, but here's do you remember? I mean, we've talked some about the Jesus People movement.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
forget that the hippies were the ones that had been pushed out of society, that dislodged from society, and treated like they were um, a threat to society, or all of that.
yeah, yeah.
Dude, conservative young men are the hippies of our
I agree.
moment,
I
and
agree.
they're coming to the Lord at a similar rate to the way the hippies came to the Lord. And
Mm,
I mean, I think we just aren't
there
we
is
aren't
a
paying attention to the
yeah,
way that God is. Like you say, oh, we because you've got all these people on the left saying, oh, we've got to go after the marginalized. You're like, you know who's marginalized?
right. That's right.
It's it's the right wing dudes that have
That's
been
right.
red pilled. That's what marginalized looks like in our society, and the church should be going after the marginalized. They should be going after it.
I agree.
Whoever God puts in front of him, but those folks are the marginalized right now. You know, people that feel like wanting wanting a wife is somehow um, me being evil.
Wanting children is
Wanting
bad.
children is bad. You know, so um, that is a major marginalized group that I think is doesn't get um we just we're just not I think um one of the things that my dad said to me when I was in high school that has stuck with me is we were watching something on TV and somebody was talking about, you know, the kids these days, they're never going to be able to do this. And he pointed to the TV and said, that's what they used to say about us, like his generation. He said that, you know, he was a hippie. That's what they used to say about us. And he said, um, they're going to say that about you, and then you're going to grow up and you're going to say that about the next generation, and it's not true because God, right? Because of what God does, right? Um, and so he said, never give up on the next generation, and that has I think about that all the time. Partly because my dad barely ever spoke, so when he did, you
You
remember
listen to him.
it.
Remembering the fifth commandment.